Welcome to the Navigating Disruption podcast. I'm your host, Shaquille Barmel. I'm the CEO of Ocean Blue Strategic and partner with the Summit Group. I'm a coach, consultant, and speaker, and I help leaders, entrepreneurs, and sales professionals make an impact through improved performance. In this podcast, I share insights and interviews with interesting leaders to define practical lessons that you can use to make an impact in the face of uncertainty. We are proud to be supported by the Summit Group, helping companies to increase revenue, deepen customer relationships by moving from sales excellence to business relevance through transformative and engaging learning experiences. I remember that conversation in May 1993 so clearly. Shortly after graduation from university, I found myself in Neil Zambik's office in what I would realize later was a life-defining conversation. I was 23. Neil was the Director of People Development and Communications at Mohawk Oil. In this episode, I find out that he also remembers that chat very clearly. Neil reaffirmed for me how long-lasting memories are when they are based in authenticity and genuine curiosity. Neil decodes for me some of the intentions behind the cultural change and meaningful lessons I experienced during that time in my career. Enjoy the conversation. Neil Zambik, how are you?
Hey, great, Shaquille. Good to see you, man. How's things?
Oh, great to see your smiling face. It's always a smiling face.
You too.
Yeah.
You too. Well, it's a real treat to have this chat with you today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, I've done a number of interviews with former colleagues from Mohawk. And just when I thought I was done, I was really grateful to get this chance to do this conversation with you. And I'll tell you why it's really important. This conversation is really important. We've talked in a number of interviews with some past Mohawk folks on how unique a culture we had and what an impactful time it was in our careers. Like everybody we talked to has that view. And I'm seeing you nodding because I think that was the same for you.
For everyone, I think. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And this whole podcast experiment I'm doing, it's now beyond an experiment after 20 plus episodes, but is all about trying to draw out what are the lessons we've learned from our life experience, our career experience, organizational culture lessons, leadership lessons on how we can help improve leadership going forward.
Absolutely.
So we worked at Mohawk during this time. I guess it's 25 years ago, almost.
Yeah, maybe you and me. I was there till 1999, so it's that's 22 years ago almost now.
Yeah.
So, it's crazy how fast it's gone by, right? Yeah.
So really quickly, just to catch everybody up and our audience up, and maybe catch you up, we'll see, because we all have different perspectives on our experiences. My first recollection of you was you were my dad's district manager for a short period of time while I was, I think, in my second year university.
Probably, it sounds about right, yes.
I was just starting to study organizational behavior and HR courses.
Yes.
And Neil, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but like you took such an authentic interest in me and what I was studying. And every time you came in, you asked me about how school was going and what I was studying. And I really appreciated that.
Well, thank you, Shaquille. I mean, I just am truly interested, right? I mean, that's the way I am. I'm interested in people, and they have the opportunity to get to know someone better. And also, I always want to help people out too. So if there was always ways to help, and I'm sure I said that at times, is there anything I can do to help you out? I'm sure I said that because I generally try to say that with people because that's really what the fun of it is, right? Is to be able to help others. And so, it was very natural for me to do that. And I'm glad you said that. Thank you so much. And I do remember those times for sure. I remember working with your dad and of course meeting you and then eventually working with you and having you come on board, which was pretty exciting. So
we're going to go back and forth in time a little bit.
Absolutely.
I'd like to go like back further in time from there.
Okay.
You got your business degree or BCom, I guess, from UBC.
Yes. That's correct. Yes, in human resources management too. So it's one of those crazy things where I actually followed a career of what I studied. So one of the few people that did that for sure.
Very cool. Can you kind of walk me through the time in between kind of the last couple of years of university and your job at Mohawk when I first kind of met you? What happened in between that time?
So finishing up at UBC, I actually had a summer job at Mohawk
Oh,
in 1984, I believe it was, and got into the HR department. I got introduced that it was again through someone that my parents knew that worked at Mohawk that got
yeah,
me in for a summer job, which is a great experience. And I just really loved the culture and the people, and everyone just welcomed me. Like I was on like we were in corporate events, we were in team events, and I was already in there, and I'd only been there a month, and it was just really inviting and really felt good. So I had one more year at university and finished that off, and
yeah,
of course, now I had a little bit of experience. I've been working on,
right,
a few HR projects, including compensation and a few other things. And I was like, wow, this is a pretty cool place. I wonder if I could get back in there, right? And
yeah,
so due to some changes and some things that happened, I was able to come back in 1985 and start there in the HR group as a sort of a junior employee, kind of
right,
learning the ropes, but just got exposed to the culture of the company and realized also too that everyone there was so inviting. Titles didn't matter.
yeah,
And I just love that kind of idea because I'm a great believer in, I don't care what your title is. I want to know who you are. And you have different skills than I do, and I have different skills than you do. So how do we make that work together? And everyone was so inviting, and it was just a great growing experience. So I continued on in my career, kind of growing to a point where I became assistant manager of the department, working under a seasoned HR person.
yeah,
And then we had some change in the organization where we actually started talking about this idea of people development. And the president at the time said, we got to get people out into different areas of the business so that they can understand things and have a better view of the business.
yeah,
So they took a person from the field and the operations side and had him come in and run the HR department while I ended up going out to the field as a district manager. And it's
okay,
always been a goal for me to get different experiences because I think that's
yeah.
critical. I mean, you have to understand the business rather than just focus on the
Uh,
area that you are responsible for.
and so that's when
So
we met. That's when we met.
that's about the time. It was
When you were,
probably around then that we met. Yeah.
yeah,
And then I was out there for just a period of about 6, 7 months, which was
yeah,
the plan was to be out there for 3 or 4 years and then maybe
yeah,
come back and head up the HR team, which would have been probably a different team by then or whatever,
yeah.
because it's always a challenge to kind of move from being peers with people to kind of managing them.
Can I pause there and
Absolutely.
ask you,
Yeah.
did you know when you were going out into the field that you were going to come back and take over the HR
Well, I don't know if I
department?
knew it, but I think it was generally a plan. It was
Okay,
definitely the plan
okay,
in my mind, and I think most people's mind. I think that was certainly the plan, but it wasn't the plan to do it as soon as it happened. I was
right,
when it did happen, I was 27 years old. I think it was a sort of one of those things where I would be cautious too, putting someone at 27 into the
right.
sort of senior HR role in a $500 million company, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
what happened is that a new president came in, and he was the former founder of the company and one of the
right,
founders, and he just said, we got to get people back into where they're strong right now. We're in a struggling along. We got to get people back into areas where they're strong. So, of course, the person that was doing HR went out to the field, and I said, well, this is my chance. This is going to
yeah,
be my chance, because if the job was filled, it was probably going to be someone 4 or 5 years older than me, and I wouldn't have that opportunity within Mohawk. And I just felt that it was a great opportunity to do that. So I fought hard, and I think there was a lot of trepidation, but
yeah.
people were willing to take the risk, which was exciting for me. And I felt the burden of that too, because I wanted to make sure that I did a good job for the people of the company. So that's kind of
That's great.
the story of
That's
how it
good. That's
happened.
helpful. That's helpful. So that is good because there's a couple of things I'm curious about.
Mhm.
And let me just set some context from what it looked like to me from the outside, because I was in the retail side. Here's what I saw. I saw that Mohawk had hired or put in charge pretty bold, strong, seasoned CEO from external,
Mhm.
from another company,
Yes.
brought them in to drive a significant change in the organization's go-to-market. And we saw a huge change in the retail look and feel, training, uniforms, branding, all that stuff.
Absolutely.
But what I didn't know that I found out afterwards, but that was wreaking havoc on the culture in a very negative way.
Mhm.
So you came into a senior HR role, basically on the management team, when that bold CEO had exited, the founder had taken over again to kind of reground the company, it sounds
Absolutely.
like. You come into an HR role on the senior management team at 27 years old.
Wasn't on the team at that stage, right?
Okay.
Initially, it happened a little bit later, but
Okay.
certainly actively involved with the team, as you
Okay.
have to be when you're the people person,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. So, but there was nobody else responsible for
No,
HR on the senior management team,
no.
right? Okay. So now I'm curious. You're coming in, the culture's been battered a little bit, organizations come through some tough times. You're now in charge of HR. What's your thought process? What's your vision? What are you seeing as your priorities?
Well, I think I'd always seen the fact that the company had a great culture, but it was one based around sort of this, don't worry, we'll take care of you. And, that's awesome. That's great. But I think we also had to think about the company's going to be going through some challenging times. Markets are tough. The margins are squeezing. We're having more competition. All of these things are happening at the same time. Cash flow is not as good, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so we had to start thinking about this idea of don't worry, we'll take care of you, but you are responsible for your own life.
Right.
And so really have that understanding that to be responsible for your own life is a very different thing than what you're used to. If you think about it, being responsible for your own life, we don't grow up that way.
Yeah.
We grow up with your parents take care of you, and then your teachers take care of you, and your coach takes care of you. And we don't generally grow up with this. And so then we're put into work and we're supposed to be responsible for our own lives.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we ever get the tools to have that. So I think that we want to try to, first of all, start to move from the culture of don't worry, we'll take care of you, to this, yes, we'll do that, but you are responsible for your own life. And I think that was a tough sort of thought process because don't get me wrong, the don't worry, we'll take care of you is a heck of a lot of fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's sort of no restrictions. You can do whatever you want. It's a ton of fun, but we can still have fun, but we need to now continue to become better.
So again, you're very young at this time and you're trying to create and craft this new way of thinking about people leadership and people management, much older people than you in the organization. Can you draw a link between early career, adolescence, childhood, where you suddenly in this situation knew that was the right direction to go? Was it support from a mentor? Was it something you experienced in your younger years? How did you know that this was the direction the organization needed to go from an HR perspective?
Well, I think, it's a great question to think about, and it's a very deep question. I think as I was young, I was always fascinated with other people and how people became successful. I had a natural leadership ability. People just expected me to run the game in the playground, that kind of stuff.
Right.
I was there naturally in me. So I guess that's part of who I am. So, but I was always fascinated by sort of what other people did and how they did things. I was always watching, right? So I think probably most of the books I read as a kid were biographies or autobiographies. I was just fascinated by other people. So I don't know if I necessarily thought of leadership as being anything that I just thought that's what you did. I got to really, really consciously think about it. But having all of those experiences with teachers, with coaches, with other experiences I had in my life, I also realized that you do have to take responsibility for your own life. And so those are some of the things that I was starting to think about. I didn't know how we were going to be able to do that. And of course, it wasn't just me that did this. It was a whole team of people that came up with these ideas. But we had to be more competitive, and we had to be stronger, and we had to develop our people so that they could become better at what they did.
Right.
And I always at the back of my mind felt that we needed to prepare people for if one day the company wasn't there, or if they weren't able to continue on in the organization, that they'd have some skills to go elsewhere. And so it was really critical that we put some of those kind of ideas and thoughts in place to be able to do that. Was it tough? For sure. I mean, I always think of it as we were trying to move a mountain. And moving a mountain is tough. It's a big thing. If you keep pushing and working at it, you do slowly move it forward. But the other thing about moving a mountain is that it does move slowly. And that's kind of good because people don't love change. Let's be honest. People don't love change. So to say that you're going to move a mountain slowly, it's good because then once in a while you look back and you go, we've moved it. And people don't feel like, whoa, what happened to me kind of thing, right? So I think that those are some of the things that we tried to do initially, is to do that, and putting in, even to the idea of changing the name of human resources to people development. That was an absolutely huge change for the organization and for the HR community. I mean, it wasn't really done out there in the world. I mean, now it's pretty common, but I think we were one of the first to put that title there. And I can tell you an example is that even when we did that, I had one person come up to me the day after we announced the change of the name of the department. And he says to me, "Oh, Neil, so you mean I can talk to you about my career now?" And I was thinking, wow, you could have said that to me yesterday or a month ago or a year ago. But just that initial sort of thought process was the beginning of change. And I think we tried to create this vision of sharing that with the organization. But then we'll talk about it probably in a bit, but really talk about how do we support that too, because it's really critical. You have to be able to, you can't just say, oh, well, you're responsible for your own life. Good luck. You have to give them the tools, the skills, because none of us really had them and we need to provide them.
I think that's a very interesting observation. You weren't just declaring that people had to look after themselves. You were thinking about, you did it. That's one step, is you thought that you have to move in that direction. You changed the name of the department, which is a very supportive name, people development. So you got two messages going on. On one hand, you're saying you got to be responsible for yourself. On the other hand, you're naming the department something that suggests that we're here to help you, people development. And then there's whatever programs you put in place. Now, was that the time you actually were been put on the management team?
Probably by then it was probably getting close. I honestly don't know sort of when it started, in the fact that I always felt that people needed to be represented in management decisions. Yeah. So when I knew decisions were being made, I wanted to make sure I was in the room adding the people perspective to the decision, right? Certainly the rest in the room had great experience in their areas and operational experience and backgrounds and, you know, technical backgrounds and all that kind of stuff that I didn't have. Yeah. But I was there to hopefully bring a little bit of a people perspective. The great thing about the management team at the company was that they cared about people too, you know, so it wasn't a hard sell. It wasn't like, you know, it was like, oh, well, there's Neil coming in with another crazy people idea, right? They cared too. And sure, we had some challenging discussions and things, but they weren't against the idea of this concept of people development, for sure.
But the signal it sent to the rest of the organization was definitely that we see people and our talent as being strategic and not just something we have to look after. Right?
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
That was the message. That's what I saw. And it did seem to show that way.
Well, I'm glad you saw that, because that was certainly what the intent of it all was, for sure. And, you know, we even did some things that you think about, wow, who would do this, as from an HR perspective. But before we kind of even changed the name, we eliminated performance reviews.
Right.
And eliminating performance reviews, that's one of the tenets of HR. You're supposed to have performance reviews. I went to the people, which is really your customers, right? And I talked to managers, I talked to employees. I said, you getting anything out of this? And they go, no, we hate it. It's stupid. It's not adding any value. I said, okay. And I just said, we're not doing it anymore. We're going to do something else. Yeah. And that's when we introduced our whole people development plan, where people took responsibility for their own lives. They developed personal mission statements. They started working on things to become the best they can be, setting their own goals and action plans, and having managers now become coaches rather than just be managers. And it's way more fun to be a coach than to be a manager, I think. So I think that initial sort of thought process of just eliminating performance reviews was, oh, well, we don't have to do them anymore. And I said, no, we're just going to change it. But what we were also changing was, as you can see, we're changing this, don't worry, we'll take care of you, to you are responsible for your own life. Yeah. Because we wanted people to create their own goals and action plans. It became, the performance management process became more driven by the employee rather than by the coach or the manager. Yeah. And it made it easier for managers, but also got employees much more engaged, much more part of the process. I think a lot of people would say, what's he doing? And realizing that there was a sort of overall plan to get there.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I'm going to probably dive a little bit into how our relationship grew. And I've talked on other episodes how this was a very defining moment in my career. And it's something that I actually even brought up in my MBA application essays, and it got read out on stage at my graduation. And that was this moment when I was declining that first job at Mohawk, because I felt that in the interview I had with two of the sales managers, I found it a little bit intimidating.
And I heard that in some of the other podcasts. Yes.
Right. That's the culture I wanted to be part of.
I know.
Now, when I declined, you called me and said, you think you can come down? And I live very close to head office. So I came down and we had a conversation, and I was like, I hope he's not going to try to change my mind. I went in and we had a conversation, and you did change my mind. Do you remember that conversation, or at least?
I absolutely remember it.
Okay. I want to hear it from your perspective.
Because it was a defining moment, because Shaquille, I knew you, I knew what you could bring to the organization. And I knew that some of the things that you had been exposed to weren't going to continue in the future. And I had to push the boundaries of what I should be saying or doing, and really did everything I could to encourage you to stay. And I think it worked out great for you and gave you some great opportunities. But I just knew in the heart of hearts that it was the right thing for you to do, given that things not that far down the road were going to be slightly different, and better for you and the organization. But awkward position I was in too, in that I can't point blank say the specifics of what was going to happen. But I did know some things, and I felt it was a calculated risk
Yeah.
that I felt I had enough trust with you, which I did, that I could do that. And, I mean, it's fortunate that we had sort of had a bit of a relationship before that we actually knew each other, that we were able
Yeah.
to have that conversation. But I distinctly remember it. I can still see you sitting there. So
A very specific part of the conversation that actually was not only the game changer in that moment, but also the lesson that I took for the rest of my career was when you said, if you don't like it, then change it.
Yeah.
And if you change it in the kind of culture you want, I guarantee, given the changes that are coming, you're going to get support for it.
Absolutely. And I always encourage people, give it a try. Like, what's your risk? What's your risk? If it doesn't work, well, okay, you're a month or two down the road. In the big scheme of life, who cares, right? You know what I mean? But it might work out, and I think it will, right?
Yeah, and it did. And I mentioned that in my conversation I had with Danny Kelly in a previous episode, I got a chance to tell him how I almost didn't take the job because of that conversation interview. And we had a great laugh about it. And honestly, Danny became one of my real mentors and supporters. And I learned a lot from him. And it did actually teach me that don't be discouraged by the surface interaction. Look beneath the surface. Danny was an incredible human being, but if I had made my decision based on that first interaction without seeking to understand what he was saying and why he was saying it, like, I would have blown a huge opportunity to grow and learn in that moment. Huge lesson.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I knew intuitively that probably at that stage you didn't realize. And I think I probably said at that time, Shaquille, this is a great opportunity. Like, trust me, like, we need you. And I think this is going to be great for you. And I don't know if I use those words, but I'm sure
something along those lines.
Was thinking like that, I'm sure.
Details get fuzzy over time, but the real defining elements that carried forward in my life, that's the one I really remembered, was that take some ownership. If you don't like it, take some ownership, which is now very interesting hearing your psychology around be responsible for yourself. That really appealed to me. This idea that, look, you're not a victim here. If you don't like it, make moves to change it. And I thought that was awesome. I thought that was really cool.
And it is hard, because like I say, we grow up not being taught that. Right. We grow up not being taught that. So now someone's saying, well, take responsibility. Well, really? I can? I'm allowed to, kind of thing, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. And again, it came up throughout my career as I was in leadership roles. You run into lots of people as you get into leadership roles. And I did run across a lot of people that were like, what are you going to do for me? Or complaining about the organization or this person or that person. And it gave me the language to start talking about, and not in an insulting way, but leading the conversation to say, okay, so what do you think you can do to change that?
Absolutely.
If you don't like the way this person's behaving, what do you think you can do to change that? And it really did help me in my leadership role. So
yeah, and well, thank you. And I do remember that time as well. And it was definitely a moment that I recall as well. And I think it was critical. And you think about the people that you had impact on in the organization and that you've talked to. I'm glad you were a part of it, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
So, and I think the other thing too is just on that coaching side is I think that one of the things that I found, and I know you do this, is the key thing on coaching is getting people to come up with the answer themselves, right? And so I can recall some of my best coaching moments were when I actually would sit with a person for an hour and talk to them, keep asking them questions. And at the end, I'd say to them, see, you had the answer all by yourself. You didn't need me. And yet it was probably an hour of very hard work, but it was so great, so gratifying that they'd walk out going, yeah, you're right. I didn't need you. I knew the answer. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want to hear.
And that was really well before the movement on professional coaching, executive coaching for mid-level managers that we're now seeing today. This was like late 80s, early 90s, right? So
absolutely.
That's exactly the philosophy that of coaching is believe that people have the answers or the ability to get to the answers themselves, and they just need some support, and good questioning is all about that.
Absolutely.
So I made a reference to a phrase. It wasn't intentional, but I realized afterwards that it could have been seen this way. When I said, I learned how to seek first to understand.
Absolutely.
One of the things that was a big mark of that time at Mohawk was, and I believe Matt Waldner from the plant,
Absolutely.
the real champion of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And can you tell me what was the thinking around investing in that training for the organization? You had everybody go through that program.
Everyone in the organization went through it. And we did a lot with that program. I had been searching for something that was going to, again, help people become the best they can be and start to take responsibility for their own life. And the 7 Habits program is really, and the book is really around that very concept of taking responsibility for your own life. And, it's really around personal leadership. And I think a lot of people think leadership training has to be for the top people in the company because they're the leaders. And my philosophy is that everyone can be a leader. I don't care where you are. You can be a leader in any role in an organization, in any role in your family, in your life. You can be a leader because the definition of leadership that I've used is people that via their positive attitude and actions and in every way their style of living make those around them better. So if you think of that as a definition of leadership, where does it say that you're reporting to me or anything like that? It's just none of that. So when we saw this program, Matt had been to a lunch briefing on the program, and we got the person who was running it to come in and chat with us. And I just felt, wow, this is something that is going to help fill that need of helping people to be able to make this transition. Take responsibility for their own lives, figure out who they are, and do it from a personal perspective. I told people, I said, we're going to give you the tools, but the challenge is you've got to work with them because if you just, and you always have a choice. You have a choice to utilize the tools or not. However, there are consequences for your choice. And if down the road, as opportunities come up in the organization and you don't get them, you will know why, because you didn't take these opportunities seriously. And it was interesting because the ones that did became much more successful. I love the 7 Habits program. I think it's fantastic. I always encourage my clients today to say, it doesn't have to be that. It can be other programs as well. I said, but the key is to stick with one and make sure it becomes the common language. And just like you said, you naturally said, I seek first to understand. Habit 5, I seek first to understand, then to be understood. So you naturally just do that. And that's what we wanted to create within the organization. And even to the point where after we went and put everyone in the company through a 3-day facilitated program, we got people, yourself included, that became facilitators of the program so that we could continue it on in smaller sessions within departments for new employees, those kind of things, so that the language was never lost. And it did. And I would suggest to you that most people that went through the program continue to use a lot of those words, which is really what we were trying to do.
Yeah, I think a really important lesson there for people listening is that for any kind of effort to change, so we talked about how you had a mindset change around take responsibility for yourself. You change the name of the department. One of the really important aspects of change is providing a common language, common vocabulary. And that was a really critical part, other than the content of the program being excellent. It did provide a vocabulary for people to say, remember habit 5, remember habit 1. And people knew what it meant, right?
Absolutely.
A shorthand to know that we were talking about the same thing.
And even new people that came into our culture, even though they didn't know, they quickly found out because it became part of the language. Well, what does that mean? What are you talking about? So we really built it into the culture as well, which was critical. And then, of course, we also supported it with making sure that our leaders were becoming better leaders. And we did a lot of work on the sort of leadership level by setting core values, by setting more, corporate direction, vision stuff, as well as the leadership team going through leadership development and leadership training.
Right. What's your favorite habit?
Again, I really try to work on a seek first to understand. I really try. I think we all have this challenge because they say that the deepest need of the human soul is to be understood. So there we are. We're out there trying to be understood all the time. And so it is hard, but it's fascinating what you can learn from people when you just let them talk.
Yeah, I couldn't narrow it down to 2. For me, it was be proactive, which is all about being responsible, recognizing that you have between stimulus and response, there's a space in between where you have a choice in how you're going to react.
Absolutely.
And that's one. And the second one was definitely seek first to understand, habit 5. And for me, the languages have evolved. I still use that language, but I work with a partner in the sales transformation work I do. And he has a fantastic story that I won't go into now, but it's being interested, not interesting.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly
the
it.
Same idea, right?
It's exactly the same idea. Yeah. It's seeking first to understand. And I think back often to the show, The Undercover Boss. And I mean, we may have talked about this, but love it and I hate it at the same time because I love the fact that the boss is going in and trying to find out what's really going on. But really, if you're doing your job properly and you can develop relationships, you can get that same information by going and talking to people. Back then, we all wore suits and that kind of thing. And I have to go to the lube plant and someone say, oh, my hands are greasy. I don't want to shake your hand. I'm shaking your hand. I don't care. And I'll take my jacket off and can I help you out? Because you have to think that way, right? You just have to think that everyone can tell you something. And people would tell me everything. It was amazing when you just open up and say, hey, what's going on? And because people want to be heard.
Yeah.
They want to be heard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ah, God, so many great stories. And,
Mhm.
like my first day at work, I was diverted to go work at the loops plant on my
Yeah.
first day at work. And I showed up in a suit. So you see that,
Exactly.
right? And
I know.
basically I changed into coveralls, and
Yeah.
I don't think it was a requirement to wear steel toe boots at the time, although I probably was, but I didn't. I was
Whatever.
wearing dress shoes on
Yeah.
that first day. That recognizing it was kind of like seek first understand, right? I'm going to the lubes plant to understand what their side of the equation is before I go back to sales and understand what their side of the equation is. It was the same
Absolutely.
premise in action, very much so.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's the fun of it. I mean, I used to love going into those different parts of the organization, and just I didn't want to go. I know you've heard stories where sometimes people would walk in, they just go straight to the manager's office and then walk out. If I had a meeting at 10 o'clock, I was there at 9:30 to make sure I could talk to some other people first, because you're people development for the whole organization, not for the manager.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, at the end of our tenure, I guess I was 98, you were 99. Mohawk was being acquired.
Yes.
And so that was an interesting time because, on some senses, it was very sad because it
Mhm.
was the end of a remarkable story of a remarkable culture of a local Western Canadian company.
Doing some really cool stuff, like really
Doing some
cool
really
leading edge
cool
stuff,
stuff.
right?
What do you think the Canadian business scene lost in Mohawk being acquired?
I think that one thing we did is brought a lot of innovation to a sort of old school kind of business, right? Which was very interesting. But if you think about it, the legacy is still sort of there. If you
Mhm.
really think about some of the cool things we did, like putting ethanol in gasoline, well, now virtually most
Right.
gasoline has ethanol in it. Re-refined lubricants are still out there. Some of the cool things that the company had the innovation and forethought to do many years ago are still there. And the reality is that, it was a tough business for us to continue in. As much as we, love what we were doing, it was very difficult to be able to continue to do it, given that we needed a lot of capital to be able to, keep up with the big organizations.
Yeah.
But I always found it fascinating and yet challenging in the fact that here we are running a business that is buying our major product from our competitors.
Right. Right.
I mean, you think about
True.
that. I mean, how long can we continue that way?
And
But
just for the listeners to be clear, Neil, so everybody else knows that
yeah,
we would buy our base fuel for the most part from Imperial Oil. We had other
Petro
arrangements,
Canada, and yep,
Petro Canada and Imperial Oil. We would buy base gasoline, and then we would add our ethanol into it,
that's
and it
correct.
would give it a boost, and it would make it
Yeah,
environmentally less damaging. And so that's what we did. But it's a good point. We
yeah.
took another product, added something to it, added a brand, added an experience, and it created something unique in the marketplace that nobody else was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what was so fun to be a part of. And everyone, I think you said on one podcast that you said they let us kids run this place. And it wasn't just kids, it was all of us. Everyone valued other people, and that was pretty cool, right?
Yeah, I think it was great. Were you one of the last people left in the
Yeah, I
organization?
was one of the ones who pretty well almost locked up the door as I walked out of the
So I
building,
haven't
for sure.
asked the question, what was it like? What was those last few months?
We had been working as our team, and you wouldn't generally see this in sort of people development, but it is people development, as we were charged with the responsibility of developing sort of the whole franchise development program.
Right.
So how a new franchisee would join the organization, how they would be trained, all that kind of thing. And we spent a great deal of time putting that together.
Right.
And it was really a neat experience in that we worked with every department, and every department got to present their way of doing things to franchisees. So we initially thought about how do we hire people. So we developed a whole hiring process. We developed training centers where these people could go and actually learn hands-on. And then we developed a 2-week intense training program for new franchisees.
Mhm.
And typical of our culture, we made sure that it wasn't run by one person, but it was run by everyone, because we wanted the franchisees to know our people.
Right.
So we did this 2-week presentation right near the end as we were being purchased and that kind of thing. So it was on the table, but nothing had been officially announced. It was fascinating from even a people development perspective, because the reason we didn't want one person to be running the whole training program was that it would, one, I think probably become a little boring for listening to someone for 2 weeks. But most importantly, we wanted people that knew their area the best to be presenting, and
Right.
then have the franchisees know that person so they could call them up if they had a problem. And I'll never forget one of the ladies that was working in data management, okay?
Right.
never in her life thought she'd be doing public speaking. And she said to me, she says, Neil, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I said, I know you can. I can do it for you, but I can't do it the way you can because you understand it. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, she says, okay, I'm going to give it a try. Before she came in, I told the crowd, I said, she's nervous. She's going to just be really supportive of her. And she had told me, she says, I've been practicing on my 9-year-old son. And she did fantastic. Again, it was an opportunity for someone to grow and develop. And it was super cool. So we get this in place. One of the objectives we were trying to do is turn, people development into a profit center too for the organization. And that was one of the objectives of this. So people actually paid to attend this.
Okay.
And on the very first day of our 2-week training program, I had to announce that we've just been purchased by Husky. So it was an interesting time to go through that, but the objective of actually developing and putting in place was pretty cool. And working with my team, it was very exciting for a couple of years to be able to put that in place and actually run it. So, I accomplished that part of the goal. Right?
I remember the original thinking about it. I remember you got me involved at one point. I think you were one of the first people in our kind of wave to actually have bought a home. You bought a home and you didn't have much furniture, and it was a big home for just you, and it was painted pink. So we used to call it the Pink Palace.
Absolutely.
So when you wanted to do like a retreat or a thinking session, you would invite us to the Pink Palace and we would sit around your dining table. And I remember being involved in helping to think through what would be the customer experience program in this program look like.
Absolutely. And we always tried to think about what we were doing this for, and we got people involved. Like we didn't just sit in a ivory tower and make decisions. We go and talk to people. And I think that was what was super cool about the culture. It was just built in. It was just naturally built in. So that was exciting. So then we go through a period of transition, which was tough. We went through this time where everything that we had done was being run by someone else who had different philosophies, different ways of doing things. And they bought the company. They have the right to do that. But it was a tough time for me because I saw our culture kind of dissipating and people leaving too, which was sad. It was always sad to see people leave. But I did struggle because I go, we're not living our culture. We're not living our values. We're not doing this. But I didn't have the power to do much. Even by then, a lot of the leadership team was gone too. But I do recall I got frustrated and I wrote one of the founders of the company, the chief owner who had come back as president, Hugh Sutherland, and I wrote him a letter. And because I had a conversation when I first started in HR, and we sat in his office on a sunny Friday afternoon. I can remember it was hot, and we talked about how you treat people and how important it is to treat people with respect and give them opportunities to learn and grow. And I'll never forget that conversation. It was just a real special conversation. It was in alignment with what I felt too. And I go, wow, we've got the leader of our company that's thinking very similar to what I believe and how you should treat people. And so I wrote him a letter and I said, Hugh, we haven't chatted in years because he hadn't been around. Right. And I said, I just want you to know, I remember this conversation. I recalled the conversation. And I said, through this purchase, it's not happening. We're not living our culture. And I know it's going to end. And I'm not naive about that, but I just wanted you to know. So I sealed it up, back to his mail. So I sent it in the mail. And I don't know, it was about a week, 10 days later, I got a phone call. Hi, Neil, it's Hugh Sutherland. And it was like, wow, he called me. You could tell he was not feeling well. He'd aged. He was struggling along kind of thing. And we had this great chat again. And he says, I've tried to do everything I can to make sure people are taken care of. He says, I've done everything. I'm old, I'm tired, but I've done everything to continue to make sure that people are taken care of. And he says, I want you to know that. And I said, Hugh, thank you so much. I said, I appreciate everything you've done for me. And it was just a nice sort of conclusion, knowing that we come sort of full circle to where we weren't living it really the way we wanted to, but we had no choice. But he still, to his last day of the company, fought for the people and cared about them and wanted to make sure.
That's definitely something I missed out on. He was a legend. I heard so much about him, Hugh Sutherland. The blueprint of what the culture of Mohawk was established by him, a people first caring culture.
Him and the other three founders, they were all good. I mean, I can recall going on it was just after I joined the organization, and we just changed our benefits program and our share ownership program because we were a share like employee owned company, right? Which was super cool back then. And I went on a road with a couple of these guys to present the new program. And we did a blitz. We did all of Western Canada in 1 week. And so I was on an airplane with the chairman of the board of Mohawk and a senior vice president and me. who was at that time 23 years old, just out of university, and got to just spend time with these guys. And you know what? They had it too. And that wasn't Hugh, that was Don Skagen, and that was Matt Christie, and those guys that had this view of how we can. And it had a huge impact on me because I'm going, here I am flying around the country with these senior guys, sitting on the airplane right beside them and having hours to chat with them. What an opportunity it was. It was super cool.
Yeah, remarkable. Actually, the truth is that even though I didn't know him, I heard stories about the Mohawk from when I was 3 years old. I grew up with it.
Lots. And your dad would have known him very well, I'm sure.
Yeah, I know he knew him. My dad still says that the most influential person for him was his first district manager, who at the time was called an operations supervisor, and that was Stan Ottman.
Absolutely.
And so that was the guy that actually made the difference for my dad in being able to establish his business in Canada.
And there's a man who held the culture as well. Like, he was a true Mohican, as we used to call him. So yeah, it was great. Yeah, no, it was super cool. It was fun times, but great learning times. And it was so neat to be a part of an organization that you truly, or I certainly truly felt very aligned with my own personal values, which I think is important. I think it's critically important.
Yeah. So the last couple of things I'd love to talk about is, what are you doing now?
Yeah. Okay.
A bit about that.
Sure. So I've continued to do sort of the HR management consulting for the last 21 years. And again, it wasn't something I sort of planned to do. I probably walked out of Mohawk a little bit jaded in a way that, as not just me, all of us did, put our lives into this place, and then all of a sudden it's just gone, it's just gone. And so the willingness.
It was a bit of a mourning period.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea of just me going into another company tomorrow and trying to get that enthusiastic and motivated and caring again, it didn't seem like a possibility. So I got a little small consulting project right out of work, and it was actually, sadly, but it was a downsizing project. And what was neat and what I kind of learned from it was that I didn't have we had done downsizing in Mohawk, which was tough. And it was tough because I knew the people. And in most cases, we'd been to their houses, it was that kind of thing, right? And here I was doing all the things I would have done at Mohawk, making sure people are taken care of, trying to, put outplacement counseling, trying to do it as professionally as possible, putting a communication plan in place, all those kinds of things. But I didn't know the people.
Right.
It's still, on the day that we did it, it still emotionally affected me, but not to the same degree. And I go, wow. Here's this opportunity, not that I had ever planned to have my own business or do consulting, but here was an opportunity to do a lot of these cool things that we've done in an organization that I got to learn and grow in, and do them for other organizations. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give this a shot.
Yeah.
And so, good, bad, or indifferent, that's what I've kind of been doing for the last 20 plus years. It's interesting. I think it's come up in a lot of your other podcasts, is that people are so critical to your success, right? It's not you, it is you, but it's what your people do. And I can tell you that virtually everything I've got in my life has been through people I know. Yeah. And in 21 years, I think virtually all my consulting, all my work has been through people I know. Isn't that kind of cool how important it is? And you think about it, you ask people and they say, well, how'd you get that job? How'd you do this? How'd you do that? Well, someone I knew.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
And I think I've heard that in your podcast about a number of these people. They go, oh yeah, well, I was this. And then this other person I knew called me up, and that kind of thing, right?
You never know. What, and that's one of the things that the other lesson I've learned in life and in business, and it speaks to if you are just generous with your time and knowledge without expecting anything in return, at some point it may come back to you. Now, you don't do it because there's an expectation that it'll come back to you.
Absolutely.
If you just do it genuinely, authentically, and give to whoever needs the help, a handful of those will lead to something where somebody will call you to ask you to help them.
I agree with that, and I agree that, and it doesn't necessarily come from that person. It comes from somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, I just truly believe that. And I've had many people, friends of mine that know me, they'll call me up. They want help with their resume, or they help with some career issues or whatever. And Neil, I'll pay you for your time. I go, you're not paying me for my time. I said, I want to help you out. Like, that's my objective. I want to help you out. And you just never know what. Sometimes 10, 15, 20 years later, something comes back from that. But again, like you said, I don't do that, and you don't do that for what you get from it today. In fact, what you get from it today is the fact that, oh, maybe I helped that person out. Isn't that great? Right? That's all I want, right? That's kind of neat.
Yeah. And it's the really neat thing about doing these podcast episodes is my first inclination was to do it for the pure joy of learning something new from people that I both worked with and new people. But it's really turned into something where I get every so often I'll get a message from somebody saying, hey, this piece of advice on this episode was really meaningful, or somebody will share something on social media. And it really does make you feel like It really is validating, right? That something you're doing is impacting other people. And that's really what we should all hope in our life, that we've impacted somebody.
Well, and I know you have, Shaquille, many times. You've impacted me, you've helped me along the way too. So it's gone both ways for sure. And that is what's cool. And I so appreciate all the stuff you are doing with this, because it's fascinating. And I'm learning a lot too. I'm loving listening to the other people and their stories. And again, it goes back to one of my first comments as we started was reading about biographies of people. Here we are, we're getting to listen to them, and it's really fascinating.
Absolutely. Last question. Any advice you have to offer leaders today? We're facing a lot of uncertainty in the next little while. Anything you'd advise senior leaders or even mid-career leaders to be?
Yeah, I think the piece of advice that I tend to give people a lot is to be tougher sooner. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but it really, like often, I mean, having to have tough conversations or having to deal with tough situations, I often was so worried about them, as I think you've probably experienced. They never often turn out as bad as you think they're going to be anyway. Right. And I think that being tougher is the opportunity to be more open, right, and to share your thoughts with people. And oftentimes those people are having the same thoughts too.
Yeah.
So you're not even so being tougher doesn't mean necessarily you are tougher. It's just being stronger to be able to say, you know what, I got to have this conversation, or I got to do this, right, or whatever. And it doesn't mean you still don't use habit 5 of seek first to understand. You still need to understand. But I've had some of those difficult conversations, and it's surprising because some people say, you know what, I'm glad you brought this up because I'm really struggling here, or I know this isn't the right thing for me. Well, great. Let's talk about how we move to another place, right? And I think that was probably, a weakness in my career initially, as I wanted to be nice to everyone, and I still want to be nice to everyone. That's who I try to be, right? But you still have to make those tough decisions from the head, right? You still use your heart and your gut, but you still have to make those tough kind of decisions sometimes. And I think as long as you continue to be respectful and fair, but still you can be tough, I think that's a key component to it for sure.
Yeah, in fact, you're absolutely right. It's something I had to learn as well, to be tougher sooner, and something I'm always working on. But I think it's really powerful, in a way that's helped me think through it is there are times that when you have to be candid with somebody, if you look at it from the perspective of what I need to tell them is actually in their service and not just to get it off my chest, it's actually to help them.
Absolutely.
It does help the psychology a little bit.
That's a key component to it as well. Thanks for adding that, because that's exactly it, right? Because really that is why you're doing it, is to help them. Yeah, it may help you too, but it really is to help them.
Yeah, Neil, thank you for this conversation. The thing I love about
thank you.
Once we end this conversation, I know it's not the end, because we will
stay in touch. Yes, for sure.
And I enjoy that. I think the last time we actually were physically together face to face was we had coffee at a Starbucks about 11 years ago.
I know, but it doesn't seem like that. I know it is, and because we've been in reasonable good contact over the time, it sure doesn't seem like that, and Zoom does help, but let's hope that we can make that sooner rather than later, where we can actually, first of all, sit in the Starbucks and then be together. So let's hope for that for sure. Thank you so much, Shaquille. And I really do appreciate all the stuff you're doing on this. I really think it's a really valuable exercise that you're going through, and I hope it continues for a long, long time.
Thank you very much, and all the best. I hope the beginnings of the year continue to go well for you.
You too, Shaquille. Thank you so much. Okay. Appreciate it. Thanks. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
See ya.
Years can go by without Neil and I talking, and we can just pick up right where we left off. Here's a few things that meant something to me from this conversation with Neil. First of all, I picked up how Neil advocated for himself early in his career. He took responsibility for his career. He was very young when he became the manager of HR, and he secured that role because he was proactive in making sure he was seen as somebody that could do it, even at his young age. And that really shows up in kind of the next takeaway, which is the whole theme of this episode. You are responsible for your own life. And Neil tried to build the culture of Mohawk in those years in the 90s around that idea that the company, yes, was looking after you, and they will look after you, but there's no service being paid to a person if we're not enabling them to be responsible. He rebranded the department as people development. He provided new tools and a language, along with other people in the organization helping him, of course. And he was trying to create a culture where people were ready just in case, if they found themselves in a position where they had to leave the organization, they were ready with the right skill set and mindset to move on and live a good life. Now, this was partly related to the significant change that was going on in the organization, and he just wanted to make sure that people were not left without being able to move on productively. I also learned from Neil, and that became very clear in my conversation with him that we spent quite a bit of time talking about, was that, when you don't like a situation, there are choices you can make, right? You can choose to walk away. You can choose to suffer through it. You can choose to complain about it with people that you trust and are close to in life. But he shared with me what became the fourth option, but actually my first option in life, which is to find a way to take ownership of the situation. No matter what your role is in the circumstance, try first to see if you can change the situation, which is what he said to me, which led me to take that job at Mohawk. He also talked about the important role that founders play in a startup in establishing the culture for the organization, right? He talked about being very young and traveling on an airplane with the founders and hearing from them what was important about the culture. And for those of you that are listening or know people that are starting up organizations, the lesson to take away is to really spend time thinking about what is the culture you want for this organization. Put it down on paper, establish it, communicate it as early as possible. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and have a great day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, or share it. I want to say thank you to one of my favorite bands, Late Night Conversations, for sharing their song Chaos with me and letting me use it in this episode. You can learn more about them on Instagram at LNC Connected. And here's more of their song Chaos to take you out.
Far behind my eyes, mediation, suffocation, it'll break me. Information in disguise. But when your eyes finally found mine, you were there, but I'm defined by the chaos in my mind. I believe what I perceive is a weave tearing at the seams, and I wonder what's behind. And my ears are bleeding, and the reason isn't the logic of the season, taking the pleasing from my soul and leaving me to die. And I feel the lacing, LNC like racing, unstationary animation taking me from the purpose of my life.